Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to everyone here and also online for tonight's Massey Music Salon. I'm Hannah Chan Hartley. I'm a musicologist, a Quadrangle Society member at Massey College, and host of tonight's event as one of the members of the programming committee for the Massey Music Society. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous peoples have lived. It is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege that we have to work on this land. Tonight, Massey Music Society is very pleased to present a music salon in partnership with Raag-Mala Toronto and part of this year's Focus on India, entitled Parallel Traditions, Exploring Classical Music from Northern India. Junior Fellow and Indian classical music trained vocalist Sourojeet Chakraborty joins us with renowned tabla player Ravi Naimpali and saxophonist Andrew Kay, who will all be in conversation with Junior Fellow and jazz bassist Sam Little. So I'm going to make a few introductions before we begin. First to begin, Raag-Mala Toronto's mission is to weave the thread of Indian classical music, or ICM, into the Canadian cultural fabric. Formed in 1981, the organization's main mandates are to promote and preserve ICM by presenting top Indian and North American-based artists in performance, and to spread awareness and appreciation of ICM through lecture demonstrations and a strong online presence. It is today amongst the longest-serving organizations in North America focused on this genre, celebrating its 42nd year of uninterrupted programming in 2022. Junior Fellow Sourojeet Chakraborty, who's in the center here, spent over 15 years training in the Patiala Gharana of Indian classical music under the late Vidushi Anurupa Bagchi and then under Pandit Ajoy Sen Chowdhury. He initially trained at the Bangiya Sangeet Parishad, then earned a Visharad degree from the Akhil Bharatiya Gandharva Mahavidyalaya, Mandal. Thank you. He is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Chemical Engineering and Applied Chemistry, University of Toronto, specializing in complex fluids. Then over here to his right is Ravi Naimpali, who studied the art of tabla playing in India, first apprenticing with his uncle, Pandit Nikhil Ghosh, and then later with eminent maestro Pandit Anindo Chatterjee. He has been an active member of the Toronto world music scene for nearly 20 years. Among the awards he's received include the Grants Desi Achievers Award in 2011 for his contribution to South Asian culture, and 2 Junos for recordings in 2003 and 2022. Ravi is part of several collectives based in Toronto, including So Long 7, Near East, and Sansar. Along with vocalist Shirshendu Mukherjee, he co-founded the Riaz Institute of Hindustani Music, a nonprofit school that offers quality instruction in North Indian vocal music and tabla. And then there's Andrew Kay at the end there, is an acclaimed musician and composer based in Toronto, writing and performing music ranging from Indo-jazz, world music, and Indian classical Raag music to contemporary jazz and improvised music. He's one of the first musicians in the world to perform Indian classical music on the alto saxophone, after spending more than a decade living and studying in the tradition Guru Shishya Parampara system with his guru in Kolkata, India. He's been featured in dozens of concerts around the globe with world-renowned conductors and is the co-leader of many innovative musical projects. And last but not least, Junior Fellow Sam Little behind me is a bassist, composer, arranger, and educator originally from Winnipeg and now based in Toronto. He plays both electric and upright bass in a wide variety of genres, from jazz to folk and R&B. He has performed with numerous artists, including Quincy Davis, Lenny Chet Bro, Mira Black, George Colligan, and Ron Paley. My paper is creased, sorry. He is currently completing a DMA in jazz bass performance at the University of Toronto. His research explores the connection between attention and interaction in jazz performance. Please join me in welcoming Sourojeet, Ravi, Andrew, and Sam.
Hannah, and welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really grateful to be a part of this event, and I couldn't be more excited to talk with Andrew, Sourojeet, and Ravi today. So I'd also like to extend a warm thank you and welcome to you three fine gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. This is fantastic. So as moderator, host, interlocutor, whatever I am today, I'm just going to be kind of guiding us through the proceedings and hopefully asking insightful questions and maybe prompting you all to ask some insightful questions towards the end of the evening as well. But I guess first, I think the plan is to go through to talk with each one of you, and maybe you'll be able to present a bit about what your role is in the musical ensemble in Indian classical music, and maybe the role that Indian classical music has played in your life as well. So I would very much like to start with you, Sourojeet. As Hannah astutely mentioned, you studied this music for 15 years early in life, and you found yourself now pursuing a doctorate, a PhD in chemical engineering. It's quite the transition, and I imagine a bit of a flip mentally, cognitively, just maybe not, maybe you feel differently. But I guess maybe could you talk to us a little bit about your early life in the music and how you grew up with it and how you came to it? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for asking that. I went into music very early on, and the story was that no one in my family actually is trained in music, but when I was young, very young, 2-3 months, my best friend with whom I wanted to play cricket was not available, and the reason was because his parents had taken him to the music class upstairs. So I went up and I sat, and my first guru, the late Anurupa Bagchi, she noticed me sitting there and she was like, okay, why don't you sing me something? And I just mimicked what was playing in the harmonium, and then she called up my parents and she said that your son seems to like music, he does not sing that badly, maybe you should consider training him. For me, if you come from India, where I was born and raised, very much in a Bengali family, so you will be trained in music and also in painting, whether you like it or not. And I received my fair share of that. I was also trained in painting, but I like music more. And towards my teenage years, I definitely inculcated, I started to like it more, and we would have like regular sessions, weekly sessions with my guru, and then I would have another guru who would accompany me on the tabla. And then around the age of 15-ish, 15, 16, I started performing in classical music concerts in India. But I know I never wanted to do this full time at that moment. I very much like what I do, and my background is in chemical engineering, so I knew I always liked what I was doing. But I never discontinued this, and even when I did my undergrad in Calcutta again, so Calcutta is one of the more culturally rich places within India where a rich tradition of classical music exists. And there, I also had another guru there, Pandit Shanti Ranjan Chakraborty, who also kept on training me for another 2 years when I was doing my undergrad. So in a way, I never lost touch with the art, and this is kind of my way of revisiting it and maybe continuing where I left off. So we'll see how tonight goes. Yeah.
And you're going to perform a few pieces.
Right. Yes. So to start off the evening, I'm going to, so in Indian classical music, we have two broad systems, the North Indian system or the Hindustani system, and the South Indian system, the Carnatic system. So I'm going to start off with, I was trained in the North Indian system, and I self-trained myself a little bit in the Carnatic system. I'm going to start off with a rag that is usually sung around this time in the evening. It's called Rag Durga. And well, we'll see how that goes. Okay. And I think I will be accompanied by Ravi and Andrew. So, okay. जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे सुंदर माधव नंद दुलारे सुंदर माधव नंद दुलारे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे तन मन धन सब तुम परवारे 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 छाड़ दिए सुख चिहि जन प्यारे जीवन के मम प्राण सहारे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे सारे मा पा धा मा पा मरे सा जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे सुंदर माधव नंद दुलारे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे जीवन के मम सारे मरे मा पा धा पा मरे सारे जीवन के मम जीवन के मम जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे सारे मम रे मा पा धा धा पा धा सा 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 धा पा मा पा मरे मम रे जीवन के मम प्राण सखारे सुंदर माधव नंद दुलारे जीवन के मम जीवन के मम प्राण सखा जीवन के मम प्राण जीवन के मम प्राण जीवन के मम Thank you. So, just for context, what I sang right now is called a bandish, which is basically a song that is done in 16 beats. It's called trital, teen tal. And the focus of the particular piece is to show free improvisation of the vocalist. So, and it's nothing is set. We have some general guidelines, but there's a lot of in-person improvisation that happens on the spot. Yeah.
Wonderful. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And so, do you have that was in Raag Durga, you said. Did you have another piece that you were performing for us, or?
We will.
Okay.
Once we.
When we move through everything else. Okay, that's fantastic.
We have another second rag that we.
Well, I have some questions about Raag Durga, so we'll come back to that for sure.
Sure.
So I think next up, Ravi, I would love to hear from you. I first came into contact with tabla music through Zakir Hussain, and I was completely blown away by the complexity, the rhythmic nuance, and just the layers that are present in that instrument. I would love to hear from you about, just the role that the tabla play in this music, and the rhythmic complexities that are inherent in it.
Okay. This music is very complex in that it uses a lot of different meters, and the accompaniment is structured, but at the same time, there's a lot of room for improvisation. So the closest thing I would say comparatively, it's like having a conversation with somebody about a particular topic. So every time you have that conversation about that topic, it might be different because each person is maybe a little differently informed or remembers and brings out some different points. So this is kind of the magic of the music is that it's different every time you perform something, and we essentially learn how to improvise in this music through learning various processes, and the entire learning of the music is in fact designed to learn how to be spontaneous and create spontaneously. So just to back up a little bit, I mean, I don't know how many of you have, maybe some of you are more experienced with the tabla, but to give somebody who's never experienced this instrument an idea of how it works. First of all, this instrument called the tabla comes from an Arabic word from the Arabic word tabal, which means drum. And there's other drums out there that are also called tabla. Like if you go to Egypt, the drum that they call tabla is completely different from this. So usually the left-hand drum is made out of a metal, either copper or brass, and this one is plated so it looks silver. And then the right drum is made out of a hard teak wood, and they're covered with a double layer of goat skin. So there's one layer, another layer around the rim. There's actually also a small piece of thread underneath this layer of skin, which acts as I don't know exactly what it does, in terms of physics of the instrument, but it makes the drum resonate better. So, and then they developed this technology at some point, which is called the shahi. The shahi adds weight to the skin and gives it even more resonance, because to accompany this style of singing, where there's a lot of long notes, you need the instrument to be able to resonate for longer. So if you took out the black spot, it rings for a long time. It would sound, if I took the black spot out, it would sound more like a bongo, and be a little more staccato. But essentially, it's an oral tradition, and we learn all the things on the tabla by being able to speak them and then commit them to memory. So some of the different sounds that we say and play are like na, tu, tak, and then left hand ghe, kat, and then we learn to make little words out of these, like dirikitatak, dhiridirikitatak, gintaran dha. With the left hand, because it's the skin is flexible, we can also bend the pitch and try to create like a vocal type of sound. So imitating the voice, like dhage na dha, dhage na dhage tuna. And so the recitation is very important because we want to try to imitate our voice with the tabla. It's a talking drum, but the language is abstract. The sounds of the drum. All I'm speaking are the sounds of the drum. They don't actually have any meaning outside that. Although the language of the tabla sounds like some of the indigenous Indian languages, but even though it's not. There's a lot of compositions on the tabla that we learn. Some of them are compositions which are themes for improvisation. So they are themes, and then usually in the beginning, my teacher would give me a list of improvisations on it. And the improvisations are fairly strict in terms of not being able to play things outside of the theme. So you have to make as much variation as you can, and my teacher would say there's an infinite number of possibilities, but you can't go outside the theme. So it's almost like, I was reading this actually earlier on Facebook. A friend of mine posted that improvisation in Indian music is like you have a sort of a chain of numbers from 1 to 6, and you can't go beyond 6, but you can reorder them in whatever way you want and create different sorts of patterns. And that's very similar to what's happening in terms of the improvisation. You cut phrases and rearrange them, introduce rests into the phrase, and this is essentially the method of developing improvisation on the tabla. So just to give you an example of that, and then there is also fixed compositions, which are where there's not really any improvisation. It's because it's so related to language. The fixed compositions are like little poems, and that we play on the tabla. So they're like a poem. There's still lots of room for interpretation. So, amongst my favorite tabla players, I can usually tell them all apart from the way that they interpret compositions, and also the way they produce sound on the drum. So I'll demonstrate one fixed composition for you. It goes like this. Gintrigata katagegedin nagadit katagintaranadha dhinta kattete dhirdagrata takradha dhirdagrata takradha dhirdagrata takradha. So the whole composition is in a 16-beat cycle. It goes like this. Gintrigata katagegedin nagadit katagintaranadha dhinta kattete dhirdagrata takradha dhirdagrata takradha dhirdagrata takradha. So this is an example of a very famous fixed composition that almost, I think, any tabla player would know from any style, really. Then we have improvised compositions. One of the main sources of learning improvisation are these compositions called qaidas. And a qaida is basically, it's like a couplet. It's a poem that is like a couplet. And one of the famous ones is Dhatete dhatete dha dhatete dhage tu na kena tatete tatete dha dhatete dhage dhinna gena. So the first part of the qaida, to me, sounds like it's asking a question. Dhatete dhatete dha dhatete dhage tu na kena. And the second part answers the question. Tatete tatete dha dhatete dhage dhinna gena. So it sounds like this on the tabla. Dhatete dhatete dha dhatete dhage tu na tatete tatete dha dhatete dhage dhinna. So one variation we can do is just repeating the first part, what I call the A part, a couple of times. So we play dhatete dhatete dha dha dhatete dhatete dha dha dhatete dhatete dha dhatete dhage tu na ta te te ta te te ta 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 te te ta te te ta ta da te te da te te da da te te da. Then rearrange it. Da te te da te te da te te da da te te da te te da. Da te te da ge tu na ke na ta te te ta te te ta te te ta te te ta ta te te. Space. Ta te te da ge tu na ke na ta ta te te ta ta te te ta ta te te da te te da te te da da te te da ge tu na ke na te te da te te da da te te da te te da te te da da te te da ge tu na te te ta te te ta ta te te da te te da te te da da te te da ge tu na. So this is the way that we create different improvisations, which are really just variations on a theme. Thank you. I think.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
I learned a lot from that, actually.
No. 15 minutes.
Okay. So I guess moving to you, Andrew. I mean, first of all, you're a saxophone player. So a...
Saxophone?
No, that's true. So an unusual instrument, to be sure, in Indian classical music. Would that be fair to say? Okay. So I guess, and you were raised in Toronto and studied at Humber. You're a jazz musician?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So same. Clearly not. But you went and studied Indian classical music later in life. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about what it was like for you to find this music and how you went about learning such a rich tradition as an adult or closer to adulthood?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in Brampton, and I came into Toronto a lot to see different concerts. I knew I wanted to go to Humber. I wanted to be a jazz musician. But when I was at Humber and searching for influence from different world traditions, I came upon Indian classical music, and it's actually thanks to Ravi, who at Humber fed me so many amazing recordings of the great maestros of Indian classical music that I think I really planted a seed quite deep. So after that year, I traveled to India alongside my brother and my friend Justin, and we were very, I think, lucky but fortunate to be in contact with a great musician who then became my guru. His name's Pandit Shantanu Bhattacharya, and it wasn't like I went to India and said, okay, I'm going to spend the next 10 years here studying this music. It was just something that I fell in love with, and I couldn't stop learning it. And so it just was like, okay, go back for longer, go back for more. And it just kept getting deeper and deeper, and I still don't feel like, in the ocean of raga music that I've, touched so many drops. But yeah, there's just something so profound about the music, which is not just the music. It is a part of the culture and the lifestyle and the land. And I think that was a big part of learning the music was being and living in India was really, when you spoke about Calcutta, and it's like I immediately was brought back to that place, which I call like a second home. So it was about the culture of that place too, and traveling around India was really important to be exposed to all the different languages and cultures and people and food and music from all around. So I think for me, what I feel very grateful and fortunate about was to be really brought into a family, to learn in the Guru Shishya Parampara, where I spent all day, every day, just doing music. It was like there wasn't any other priority other than sleeping and eating. It was just doing music. And I think if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't, have continued or wouldn't have been able to go as deep as maybe I have in the music because of that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And so you're going to demonstrate a little bit of music for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
well.
just to explain, I'm playing the harmonium as an accompaniment because that's a part of the let's say the contemporary Indian classical music. The harmonium, it was introduced like a lot later, but it's pretty standard as a support for vocalists. And also as a learning tool. I think if you know, like you said, Sourojeet, every Bengali family has a harmonium and has songs, and not only Bengali, I'm sure many Indian families, right? The harmonium is really important, but it is such a great tool to learn the fundamentals of the music. So I wanted to bring that to be able to support and show that. But my journey in Indian classical music was not with the harmonium at all. I went to India to just explore, and my guru is a vocalist. So he immediately said, yeah, don't bring your saxophone, leave it at home. You can already play the saxophone. He said, just start singing. And so a lot of what I did was just repeating back, the phrases that were being sung, having to learn the language, the sargam, and then learning the phrases. And eventually, after a few years of doing that, I started to apply that music onto the saxophone. And so then, my brother, who's also a saxophone player, Jonathan Kay, we spent a lot of time together just trying to figure out how to translate or figure out how to play the music on the saxophone. And because our Guruji is a vocalist, we learned a lot of vocal style music, so emulating something similar to what Sourojeet sang for you, and how to play that on the instrument. But then also there would be compositions that are only for, what they call a gut. It's just for an instrument. There's no lyrics. There's no language to the song. It's just the notes or the swadas. So I thought I could give a short kind of presentation of one of the most common ragas called Rag Yaman. I'll play a short little Auchar Alap to kind of create the phrases. And then I'll play a composition in Madhya Ektal, which is a 12-beat cycle. And this is a composition by my guru's guru, Prashun Banerjee. And so even though you won't hear the lyrics, there are lyrics to this song. It's very beautiful. And then followed up by a short Drut Tintal, which is a composition by my Guruji. And this is, it's in Tintal, so a 16-beat cycle. And it's particularly interesting because the mukra, or the beginning of the phrase that starts the melody, starts on the very last beat of the cycle. So you can see if you can count and catch that. If not, then just enjoy the music, okay? Yeah, was it like just a short act? And maybe just for context, you might be hearing this sound in the background. If we had another person, which we normally would, they'd be playing an instrument called the tanpura, which is essential to the music. And this is just a recording of the tanpura. So just so you know, we're like, why is he on his phone, or what's this sound that's coming? It's very essential to the music, and in India, you would never see a concert with vocalists without a tanpura player, or someone playing the instrument. So, but with the advent of iPhones and speakers, it's very common now that you use the recording.
wonderful. Let's give them another round of applause. So I've had the privilege of already kind of knowing how this is supposed to go. And so now I'm going to invite you all. I mean, as I understand it, you've also prepared a piece for us collectively to perform. So I don't know if any preamble need be said about that, but I would invite you to now if
Okay.
yeah.
So we talked about ragas before. A raga is basically a collection of notes. One of the more common ragas that's often used to improvise within my gharana, the Patiala gharana, and that's the raga that we all will be presenting today. It's called Raag-Mala Toronto. Raag-Mala Toronto is it's a pentatonic raga. It uses 5 out of the 7 notes of an octave, and it is supposed to create a mood of contemplation, meditative equipoise of sense. And so we have a composition that we curated, and we will be going through a couple of elements. And this is more how a traditional Indian concert would happen. I'll start off with what we call an alap, which is like a little introduction to the raga in terms of just notes and R's, like vocally. Then we start off with a bandish, which is another song like the one we sang before, but it's in a different raga. It's also in a 16-beat composition, the Teental. And once we do that, we'll do a couple of tans, which are basically vocal ornamentations that we do either in terms of the notes or in terms of reverberation of the vocal cords. And then when Ravi was talking about his component, he was talking about the beats that a tabla would typically have. We also have a composition that we call in the vocal tradition a tarana, or in the southern part of India it's called tillana. It's basically a vocal composition that has the words, which are the beats and of the tabla. And the idea is that the vocalist and the tabla performer can together perform that. So that will be, if you may say, quite of like the crescendo. So, and in the Carnatic system, the same raga, Malkosh, is called Hindolam. In the Carnatic system, we have parent ragas and daughter and sons ragas. So the parent ragas are called Melakarta ragas, and the ragas that arise out of the parent ragas are called Janya ragas. So the parent raga for Malkosh is the 20th Melakarta raga called Nata Bhairavi, and Malkosh arises from Nata Bhairavi. So it's offspring raga of the main Nata Bhairavi. Okay, so I guess we'll present to you our composition. So I'll start off with the alap.
We can also speak to the idea.
Yes.
No, just quickly, in Indian classical music, the most common performance by anyone, either a vocalist or an instrumentalist, is in a sense a solo performance with accompaniment, and that's really how the music is trained. And what you see sometimes in concerts are what we call jugalbandi. And jugalbandi is like a duet, and those are usually with artists that say know each other quite well or have practiced, or maybe they're very established artists and they've been put together to do a jugalbandi. And sometimes you see jugalbandi from North India and South India, and there's not always a clear or easy translation or meaning point, but it's always there. Musicians find that way to make beauty and to find a way to connect in that way. And so it's a very particular and special part of the music. I experienced this a lot with my brother because we performed together as a jugalbandi, and that was one of the main ways we performed. But it's like trying to have one mind between two people, because how do you know where the next improvisation will go? And so we'll do our best to do that between saxophone, vocals, harmonium, and tabla to find all that together. So,
Okay. So in the alap, Andrew and I are going to do a jugalbandi with the saxophone and the vocal. It's my first time doing this, so we'll see how that goes. ma ga ga ma ma ni da ma ga ga ma ma ga sa ni da da ni sa ga ga ma ma ni da da ni sa ma ga sa mor mor muskat jaat aso chavili nar char kar shringar mukh mor mor muskat jaat kahu kiya kiya rasili man bhai da ni ni sa ga sa ni da ni sa ga sa ni da ni da ma da ni sa ni da ma ga ma da ni sa ga sa ni da ma ga ma da ni sa kahu ke आके या रसीले मन भाई गाँव के आके या रसीले मन भाई या विध सुंदर बाहु कलाए चली जात सब सखिया साथ मुख मोर मोर मुस्कात जात मुख मोर मोर मुख मोर मोर मुस्कात जात छबीली मोर मोर मुस्कात मोर मोर मुस्कात मोर मोर मुस्कात तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे दानी तदानी नन्वे तुन्वे तना रे दानी तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे दानी तदानी नन्वे तुन्वे तना रे दानी तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धार यारे मोहलिया लाय लल्लल तन दे रे ना तडानी यारे मोहलिया लाय लल्लल तन दे रे ना तडानी धाकट तक धुमकट तक धट्टा क्रांदा 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 तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे दानी तदानी नन्वे तुन्वे तदा रे दानी तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे यारे मोहरिया लाय लल्लल तन तेरे ना तडानी धाकट तक धुमकट तक धट्टा क्रांदा 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 तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे दानी तदानी नन्वे तुन्वे तदा रे दानी तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे यारे मोहलिया लाय लल्लल तन तेरे ना तडानी यारे मोहलिया लाय लल्लल तन तेरे ना तडानी धाकट तक धुमकट तक डट्टा क्रांदा 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 तुम तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे तुम तना दे रे तना दे रे तना दे रे नाटक धारे तारे
That was wonderful. Truly beautiful. It was so neat to hear you two play off of each other as well. That was a lovely experience, and I think you described it exquisitely. So I felt like I really got an insight into what was happening. One thing that I would love to ask all of you, but whomever wants to answer really, is to maybe just talk me through what a raag is at its maybe most basic level. And this is me just trying to play, naive babe in this circumstance. And like from what I've read about ragas and raags, it's like a pitch class or a pitch set, but it's not quite a mode. And there's different ways of performing it in terms of the order that you go up the scale or down the scale. I think even using the word scale is probably a little bit blasphemous. So maybe, like, for those of us in the room who are encultured in Western classical music or pop music or whatever, this word gets used a lot, but I think it's still a bit of a mystery, at least to me.
Oh, yeah. I was kind of anticipating that question, to be honest, right? Because when I performed before to a Western audience, the concept of raga is a bit foreign because it's neither a node nor a scale. It's actually very simply the way I would explain it, and of course I'm biased because I'm approaching this from a more Indian perspective. So you have the 7 notes, right? So you have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. We call it sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa. But then we also have other nodes like re, ga, dha, and ni have 2 different modes. And so for instance, re is one form of singing, but like sa, re, that can be another form of singing. So a raga basically is a collection of these notes. So if you consider the extended system, then there are 4 more, because there are 4 notes that have 2 different oscillations. And actually the one that you hear on the tanpura, the recording, that is usually done in the 1st and the 5th note, or the 1st and the 4th note, sa, ma, and sa, pa. And the reason we do that is because they do not have variants. So they are called the achal swar, or what that means is the immovable notes. So we tune the tanpura and all the instruments based on that. Now back to the raga. A raga is basically a collection of these notes placed in a certain manner so as to bring out a certain mood and expression. It can be pentatonic, hexatonic, or heptatonic, depending on how much of the octave you use. But the counterintuitive concept that I've seen, at least in my understanding, is that we tend to think of ragas as kind of fixed, but they're not truly fixed. The concept of the notes changes depending, like the raga will change depending on where you start your note. So the raga in itself is not fixed. And as an example, I mean, it's actually very appropriate that I sang Durga and Malkosh, because you can show them to relate. So for instance, Durga is sa re ma pa dha sa. So that's the note. And in Malkosh, sa ga ma dha ni sa. But then if I take the sa and I bring it down to the ni, I actually get Durga. So for instance, sa ga ma dha ni sa, sa ni dha ma ga sa ni, sa ni ni sa ga ma dha ni, sa re ma pa dha sa. You get Durga again. Likewise, if you have sa re sa ga ma dha ni sa, if I put ga as the sa, I actually get another raga called Bhupali. So sa ga ma dha ni sa, sa ga ma dha sa, ga ma dha ni sa ga, sa re ga pa dha sa. That's another raga in itself. And so my point is that raga is just a collection of notes, but at the end of the day, it's more complex than just a collection of notes. So very roundabout way of answering that anyway.
Cool. Okay. I think I understand a bit better now.
It's difficult.
Could I speak to the idea of like, I think in any tradition, in any music, there's always an attempt to simplify or an attempt to reduce it to simple parts. And in the highest form, it's not simple at all. It's highly complex. So even in Indian traditions, there's been multiple, people come through and create systems of organization and learning, which in a way reduces the actual complexity of it, but it helps us to learn. Coming from like a Western music tradition and then moving to an Indian music tradition and learning that way, the main thing that I really felt different, because I could make sense of all of what you just explained, and I could make sense of it in translating it to the Western system, and there's so many parallels in that way. But one of the big differences I found was not only in the expression of the beauty of the language of what the poetry was that the music is based on, but also in these ragas and how they express a certain sentiment. And that sentiment is the same for the raga, no matter where you are in India or now around the world, that if you present this raga, that you're doing your best to express that emotion, that feeling, and to even a further extent, maybe an aspect of nature. And one of the things that really drew me to Indian classical music that I didn't find in Western music very easily was this connection to nature, where the swadas or the notes were actually shifting according to the time of day. So you'd be using notes that were lower when the sun was low, and as the sun rises, the swadas or the notes become more higher or natural or sharper, we might think in Western music. And to me, this idea that the music reflected nature was just so powerful, and I think that also you see that it ties into a lot of the spiritual traditions that are a part of learning Indian classical music, which I think is one of the most beautiful aspects of it for me to learn. So that's just another area of kind of how to express what a raga is.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And even as like, I was sitting here listening to you all talk about the music and the expression of the music, you know, these analogous words end up coming out, like poetry and, you know, drawing on different ways of like expressing emotion and, you know, this emotion as well. So like all of these, it seems like there's a really dense connection between the music and culture and personal feeling and nature. And so like that's one powerful thing that I've heard. I'm getting an online question here. So are we able to? Okay, so Andrew and Ravi, this is from Clement Kent. How did Indian music lead you to jazz or vice versa?
You want to answer first, Ravi?
Well, I guess when I started playing Indian music, I was quite a bit of a purist and couldn't really imagine mixing this music with any other kind of music. But when I went to university at Carleton, I had some opportunities to play with some jazz musicians there, and it really made me realize that these traditions have a lot in common, especially in the improvised aspects of the music. So that always has interested me and still interests me as to how these two traditions have improvisation as a main component of the music, and that they can find places to intersect.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that Ravi's mentorship or example of, you know, the first compositions I played after being exposed to Indian classical music were Ravi's compositions, where he was, I guess you were exploring that with Tassa, right? And it was like taking, you know, ragas or music inspired by India and finding a way to express it in a more contemporary or Western way. So that was one of the first exposures I got. And then while I was in India, I had to become a real purist as well, by choice and by force. There was times when my Guruji would say, don't listen to anything else, just practice. Don't listen to music. You don't need to listen to anything, not even Indian classical music by other artists. Just listen to what you have to learn. I didn't always follow that, but sometimes I just needed to listen to some pop music or something else. But eventually I think there was a big part of, you know, that's really important, because to understand the music, you know, any tradition, you have to go very deep to really get a good grasp of it and understanding. But then there's also, once you have that foundation or that grasp, then there's a question of how to come back to, maybe for me, coming back to a Western. So there was about learning how to blend and finding ways to move between different traditions or different genres. And that's really where I focus a lot of my time now, is trying to find that space between, you know, when I'm not, say, performing Indian classical music or playing jazz. The world is changing, and there's a lot more mixing of things, and I think it's important to stay true to the tradition of, especially classical or where music came from. That's very important, and then it's also important to embrace what's new and what we can create that's new from that.
That's wonderful. Do we have any questions in the audience? Apala, you get a microphone over.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, Ravi, and Jeet. It was amazing. I was wondering, Andrew, when you were playing the saxophone, like a lot of your method, reminded me of, and especially what we call meers, the stretches or the curves. It reminded me of, if not the flute, but the Chennai. So I was wondering if you had, like, while you were training in saxophone, training like to play ragas in saxophone, was that a competitive instrument for you, or like, did it ever come up that, why not learn the Chennai uh, alongside or something? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, thank you. I've tried to play Shania. I have a few, and it's very difficult. I can play maybe about 10 minutes of alap, and obviously some little things, but I never studied with a maestro or a guru. One of my dreams was maybe to go to Banaras and study with someone in the family of Bismillah Khan Sabji. That would be a dream, but no, I picked it up a little bit, but definitely listening to it. I mean, it's definitely such an important instrument and comparable to the idea that it's a reeded instrument. And I think that's a beautiful thing I found in the saxophone is that it can sound like the voice, it can sound like the bansuri, it can sound like the shanai. It's just a matter of how you apply. And I mean, the mean, like the bending of notes, that's something also very particular to Indian classical music, which we don't have so much in a very established way. It happens. We have great examples in Western music where people are bending notes, but it's not a part of the music where that's what everyone is doing exactly. It's more of a expression that, oh, that's nice how we do that thing. But in Indian classical music, it's essential, it's very important. So learning how to do that on a Western instrument that was built to not do that was one of the big challenges, and there are limitations. And I think that's also the beauty, is to find where those limitations are and maybe somehow try to transcend them. Create the illusion that I'm bending a note, but I'm not really bending a note.
I will admit, sorry, just as an add-on, it was sort of a confusing experience, but in a great way, just you displaying that with the Indian classical, sort of using your instrument to play the Indian classical music. That's it. I had nothing else to say. It was a great experience.
Hi, and thank you. I had a question about lyrics. Not being a native speaker, obviously, when this music is based on improvisation, so I'm just curious what you are singing. Is it related to the American jazz tradition of scat singing, Ella Fitzgerald, etc.? Are you riffing on poetry? Are you repeating words?
Oh, right. Okay.
What are you articulating exactly when you're improvising vocally?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, because the Indian style of music is very, very ancient, and it actually comes from the earliest religious scriptures, and the proper documentation of that is actually in another text called the Natya Shastra, which also has the codification of dance, by the way. So what I'm singing is traditionally, like the bandish, the lyrics of the bandish are usually in Sanskrit or in Hindi. There's a part of Hindi that we call like more classical Hindi that is not spoken today in the subcontinent, but that would be the language in which a lot of those saints would sing, like the Sufi movement when it was there in India, a lot of people would. So in specific to my case, so the first raga which I sang, so that is in that form of Hindi, called it's a form of Hindi that's special around Lucknow. It's called Awadhi Hindi, and it basically describes a person's submission to Narayan. Narayan is one of the gods in the Holy Trinity. He's the preserver of the universe. And there's a school of Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement was this kind of movement that arose in the history of India, wherein one tried to become, dare I say, enlightened or connected to divinity by almost being in playful embrace with the God itself. So that's what the lyric is. So the Rag Durga, the bandish, is basically an ode to the god. And the second one, the Malkosh, is it's actually in more Hindi and more spoken Hindi. and it is describing a person. A person is describing a beautiful woman. So it's but it's not to be interpreted as someone describing a woman. It's basically a comment on appreciating the sacred feminine, in a sense. So there's of course a verbatim meaning of the text, but there's also more symbolic meaning of the text. And like what Andrew said, like a lot of these liturgy and literature arise from the spiritual traditions of India, and so the reason you need more practice, and when you do more practice, you kind of borrow into those kind of emotive moods and references that the texts have for that, and you bring them into your music style. So yeah.
Maybe just to add on to that,
Yeah.
because you mentioned like scatting, and you say, well, the music is improvised to a degree, and I think a simple way to understand the different ways in Indian vocal you can listen for is there's the embellishment or the moving of the actual lyric. So there might be a stretching out of the lyric where you're still singing the words, but you're adding many different notes or different shapes or phrases in the raga. Then there's sargam, which is actually just singing the notes. And so you can do a ton or a line that you're just singing the actual name of the notes. So that's common, which we don't have in Western music at all. You can imagine if you were singing, scatting and saying the actual notes, that would seem...
Well, it's like singing in solfege.
Yeah.
Singing the rag in solfege. There's improvising on the solfege and improvising on the lyrics.
Yeah. And then maybe the third one would be akar. There could just be an
Yeah.
open sound.
Vowel
akar.
sounds.
Yeah, vowel, yeah. So those are the three things like you could probably listen to that are the easiest to pick up on in the improvisation or variation. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Sure. So this question is to any of you, and as someone unfamiliar with the space, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the guru-learner relationship. I don't know what the learner is supposed to be called, but I guess how does that affect the music you play? How do you select a guru, or does the guru select you? Like, I'm just kind of interested in that process and that relationship.
Do you want to go first, and then I can?
Go down the line. This
Yeah, we
is
can go
supposed to be a quick question. It's probably the biggest question of the evening. Yeah, you answered yourself. You said the guru selects you. No, I don't. I mean, there's stories about this. I feel so lucky to have found the guru that I have, and there are traditions in India about guru shishya and what that means, and there are like rituals and things that happen. And for me, I wasn't necessarily a part of any of those, but what I felt very connected to was feeling like a part of a family, and like that my guru could be my father or my brother or any person in my family that has this love and respect for me and wants to culture me in this music. And that's how the more time I spent with my guru, the more I could absorb the wisdom and knowledge that he had and was able to offer to me. And that was obviously passed on to him by his gurus and by the gurus before that. So there is this connection of lineage, which is important in the tradition, and I feel honored to be, to say that I have a guru that has taught me this music to whatever degree I know it. And yeah, that's as much as I can say without.
Yeah, in terms of the vocal tradition, I think yours is an excellent question. Like among the Hindustani, like the northern schools of India, we have what we call gharanas, which are basically sub-lineages within the main lineage. And each of those are identified by very, very distinctive traits. Like for instance, one of the traits, my predominant gharana is Patiala. It is identified by a lot of vocal ornamentations, a lot of what we call kampan, which is basically vibration of the voice and the notes and staying true to it. On the other hand, there are other gharanas like Mewati Gharana, Kirana Gharana, then there's another called Bhindi Bajar Gharana. All of these have their own unique styles, and yeah, to the lay person it might appear to be the same, but to the trained eye you can identify different. For instance, what I did some time before, transition from one raga to the other, it's also a specialty within my gharana. It's usually called Avirbhav Tirobhav. What we do is once the practitioner establishes one raga, then they show flexibility by going into simpler ragas. As regards the Guru Shishya tradition, that's exactly how the way I think of it is, because I've had that luxury of being in grad school, so I think it's kind of similar to having a doctoral advisor or something like that, except your training is in music, and this person has so much of experience. Like Andrew said, they all come from a lineage that can be traced back to hundreds of years, and then so because of that, they're also fixed, but they're also somewhat experts in their own field. And so that's why you would seek a guru, because you would want to be trained under some of the best people, especially if you want to be considering singing as a full-time career, right? So that's what I would, and I've been very lucky to have like 3 gurus, like 2 main guru and then 1 as well, yeah. So
I would say there's a lot of good things about the Guru Shishya system. There are things I think should and probably will change over time as regards to Guru Shishya, because I mean, in an ideal relationship like that, your teacher is also teaching you by example how to be an artist, you know, to be open, to develop discipline, to be humble about your art form and all of those things, but sometimes that's not always there, right? So the person's modeling things that are getting passed down that probably shouldn't be. And also sometimes in Indian music, some gurus get very possessive about their students. They don't want them to learn from somebody else or some other style, which, you know, even the great masters of the past had a certain openness and learned from sometimes several different masters, but now there's a sort of possessive nature sometimes that comes in that prevents people from learning, which I think is not the right approach. I mean, learning should always be encouraged by any teacher, from anybody.
Those are all wonderful answers. I think we got a full spectrum there. Yeah. So I'm sad to end this, but I think now is the time. Hannah,
Yes.
I'll turn it over to you. Yeah.
Thank you to all of you, Sourojeet, Ravi, Andrew, Sam, for this wonderful presentation and performance. And thank you also to Raag-Mala Toronto for being our presenting partner for this event. So yeah, we should give them a hand. On behalf of Massey Music Society, thank you to Joe Costa and Matt Glanfield for producing this event, and to Alyssa Ginsberg for coordinating. And thank you to all of you who have joined us here and online tonight. We hope you enjoyed the event. We have 2 more Massey Music Salons coming up in the winter semester, but further details to come, so you're kind of kept in suspense for now. So do watch out for the Massey College newsletter, where we often announce our events, and also an email if you're on the mailing list. And we look forward to having you joining us again. Thank you and good night.